Hi, welcome to Addiction Recovery Place, the podcast champion addiction treatment professionals around the world. I'm your host, Chris Langley, and I'm very pleased to introduce today's guest, Jessica Swan. Jessica is the Executive Director of Recovery Consulting in Williamsburg, Virginia, and President-elect of the Virginia Association of Addiction Professionals. Jessica has extensive experience in clinical addiction counseling, research, development, training, evaluation, and reporting for legal professionals, non-profits, government agencies, and communities across the nations. She writes addiction recovery curriculum for treatment programs, offers counseling for individuals and families with substance use disorders, and provides addiction recovery counseling for organizations. Jessica also specializes in helping high-level professionals and their families, including professional athletes, doctors, judges, lawyers, and pilots, and has extensive experience working in the justice system and its intersection with mental health and substance use. Welcome to Addiction Recovery Place podcast, Jessica. It's so good to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here with you. Thanks for asking me to come in.
Really excited. I've just given an extensive introduction there, but I'd love you to tell us about yourself and your career so far. It's very exciting.
Yeah, thank you. You just never know what's going to happen in life, right? So I've been doing this work about 17 years. And when things started out, I was working in administration for an alcohol counseling agency that did, legal people who were in trouble with the law and needed to do requirements for counseling and breathalyzers and urinalysis and things like that. And that's how I got involved in the work. And then I went and got more education and became a addictions counselor. This was out in Colorado. And worked in residential treatment for about 5 years. And then I have on and off throughout my career, and I still do some work with residential programs. But in 2012, I started addiction recovery consulting. And then in 2022, our board voted to drop off the word addiction. And so we're called recovery consulting now. That was really about leading with recovery instead of leading with addiction. Yeah, so that's kind of like what started me off in the field. And over the years, after founding the nonprofit, we really accelerated the work in kind of 3 tiers of work: research, training and education, and then counseling work. And I have been forever interested in those intersections between behavioral health and the justice system in the United States. And so a lot of my work has centered around that particular area. But, recently we've expanded out to, training more clinical staff and people in our field, other counseling folks and things like that. So kind of all over the country doing all kinds of stuff.
Wow, that sounds quite incredible. So you've done this over the past, was it 17 years you've been doing this for? Goodness me. Well, congratulations on everything you've achieved. And I can't wait to hear more about this, because can you tell us about your practice and what services you provide, please?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we kind of have these 3 prongs of work that we do. We are a nonprofit, so we do fundraising in order to support our work. And we do counseling services, individual and family support, basically for helping their loved ones get into treatment, family support for helping their family find recovery, that kind of thing. And then we do, so that's like the counseling service area. We also do a component of research. Usually that involves things like, government or facilities who want to have some sort of review or of an outcomes. We've done an outcomes program for the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. We've facilitated that for a few years, and that became the launching pad for what they have now as the Foundation of Recovery Science and Education. So things like that, where we're doing sort of outcomes related or evaluation research work. And then the other part of this is training and education, which has been a big focus for me. So I'm the executive director, and so I tend to be the person that winds up doing most of the teaching and training work. And that's my favorite area. I get to decide to do that. And so that's been a real gift for me, is to be able to travel and teach folks across the country in different types of sectors about education about addiction, how to help people in the workplace, how to help people in the legal profession in particular, where we see a lot of addiction issues pop up for people in that profession because of the stress and trauma, and personality types in that field. Anyway, so I just have kind of a real passion for that part of our
Wow,
work.
absolutely love it. So you you've clearly got a really experienced team behind you, Jessica. So can you tell us about some of your team members that you work with?
Yeah, we've been a small nonprofit for a long time. It was just a party of one with a board of directors. It's not too different now. It's still pretty small. But we do have, I'm a clinical supervisor, and so I have supervisees, I have mentees, and we have a active board of directors that helps us to achieve everything we need to achieve. So we get the counseling staff, and then we have a support staff for research and education work. And we use platforms and contracting to do a lot of like the scheduling and the billing and all of those types of things. So we resource all of that stuff
Oh,
out. Yeah.
wow. You're
Yeah.
also, I've mentioned earlier, you're president-elect of the Virginia Association of Addiction Professionals. Can you tell me about this position and how you work in your state and how people can join the organization?
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. My position, it's kind of like being vice president, So in March of 2025, I will hopefully be elected as the president and take over David Semenko, has been our president, and he stepped in for somebody who had to stop their term short. So he's been leading us for a while, for several years now. And so I'll be taking over his position. He has been very active in our board for many, many years. So I have big shoes to fill there. So I am excited about taking on the role. And I have been on the board since, oh, gosh, I think 2020, maybe 2021 is when I finally got officially elected onto the board. But my role with them has been to build membership as membership chair and the events chair. So really building out our events for our members and helping to build our community partnerships with other agencies and organizations around the state. And I really enjoy, it's a good intersection for me in the work that I do in my own nonprofit to do this type of work with an association where we're trying to build professionalism, get people engaged in the state and getting excited about being a professional, right? And so that I have a passion for that kind of thing. I think it's really important. And then people joined through being a part of NAATP, which is the National Association for Addiction Counselors, right? And so people can join NAATP, and then whatever state they live in, they would join the affiliate that is a part of that. And so VAAP, the Virginia Association of Addiction Professionals, is the state affiliate of NAATP. And so you can join by going to the NAATP website, naatp.org. And you can also join by going to our website, which is addictionpros.org, vaaddictionpros.org. And there's a button to join now. And you can join it at a bunch of different levels, right? So students who are in college or studying to become addiction counselors join us. We have peer recovery specialists that join. We have people that are thinking about doing this work that are like associates. They join. And then, of course, professionals and organizations as well. So, so we have a bunch of different levels, and we believe in ethical treatment for people. And we have a code of ethics that we subscribe to, and we help to ensure that we are doing the best we can as professionals in our field to help others.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if someone wants to enter this profession, Jessica, so how would being a member of NAATP help their career, would you say? What's the main goal?
Absolutely. Well, so I mean, there's a few different things that I think are really important. One is showing by being a member, you're showing others and in the public sector that you are a part of something bigger than yourself. That includes advocacy at the national and state level for people who need help with addiction and mental health. So that's one arm of what is a value is like you get your voice elevated to the national and state level of legislation, right? And then there's other things like CEs, continuing education, massive numbers of free education on the website and live. Lots of trainings. We provide them at the state level in Virginia, but NAATP has tons, hundreds of CEs that you can get per year to stay on top of all of the newest things that need to be addressed, new science, new clinical work that you could put into practice. So you can get trained up on all kinds of stuff there. So those are the huge benefits, I would say, among others. I mean, I like the networking components of this and growing my professional network by going to events and meeting people. So there's a bunch of stuff out there. Yeah.
Definitely, it's quite an incredible organisation. It really is. I've been so impressed learning more about it. It's wonderful to see that this is available for new people who are entering the profession. You just mentioned that you attended the conference, which was in October in Washington DC. How was this experience, and what did you do at the event?
Yeah, it's a big conference. If you haven't been, it's a great conference to go to. So many choices and things to do. My main reason for going is because I serve on the board, right? So because I am on the affiliate, the president-elect of our affiliate, then you become a board member when you become president. So I needed to attend in order to get, brought up on all of the details that are going on at the national level. And so that was my main work there. I also did work supporting the fundraising efforts for the Education Foundation and went to a few great sessions. There was a great session by a guy named Bosco who is now out of jail and prison, but he spent his younger life in jails and prisons and trying to escape. He actually tried to escape several times, but then learned the law while he was in prison. And was able to figure out how to get out of prison by representing himself in the legal system. And it was just fascinating. So he's actually got a movie deal, I think it's on, I don't know, Peacock maybe. Bosco is what it's called. So he was great.
I'm definitely going to try and check that out now. That sounds amazing. It's always lovely to hear these inspiring stories of people who have really been through an awful experience and they've come out the other end and are doing some great work for their community and their country now as well. It's just wonderful to hear. It really is. So have you got any future plans with the Virginia Association of Addiction Professionals and your own, recovery consulting?
Oh, yeah, that's such a big question, right? Yeah, VAAP is really trying to build out the things that the membership has asked for. And the big thing that they ask for is training and networking. And so I became an events chair and we created a committee. And so we have members who are on a committee that are creating new events and opportunities for a membership to participate in networking and learning at the same time. So in 2025, we're going to have the Winter Academy. It'll be the first annual Winter Academy. And that this year it's going to be a 2-day ASAM training of the 4th edition. So that's going to take place in January 16th and 17th of 2025. So that's a big new event that's been added to the roster of things that we're doing next year. And we're hoping to build off of this first one and make it bigger year by year, so that's the first thing I would say that's really big at VAAP. We're also working on, more professionalization of our work through additional training. The annual meeting and training in March is going to happen. I think it's on the 14th of March, and that'll be in Marriott Short Pump in Richmond, Virginia, where we'll do a full day training for, I think it's like $15 to pay. The ASAM training is $60, which, I mean, these are so cheap relative to what you would normally have to pay. But anyway, the March event is going to be recovery allyship training for clinicians. So for clinicians that are addiction counselors, learning really how to use great language of recovery and recovery language forward kind of perspective integrated into your counseling practices. So I'm excited about that as well. The recovery consulting work we're doing is really, I think I kind of was talking about this earlier, working towards more training and education. That's really kind of our goal right now. So We're looking at doing a seminar for women, a weekend seminar for women in February. Several conferences are on the books for trainings across 2025 already. I'm actually headed to Rome, Italy next week, to do 2 keynotes at an international conference for addiction and psychiatry. So that's really exciting. So it's that kind of stuff with our work that we're really trying to get to, sort of the higher level of reaching all of the professionals and the researchers and bridging some gaps with that information so that people who are clinicians can reach the research and implement that in their lives and in their counseling practices.
That was a big question and certainly a big answer. That's incredible. So with the event that you're having next year, you said in January, February, is that an online event or is that an in-person event?
In person. So the Winter Academy with VAAP is going to be in person. That's going to be in Bristow, Virginia on January 16th and 17th at the Youth for Tomorrow facility. So they have a training building and they're offering that up for us to do this training. So so that's an in-person training. That's going to be really a great thing. I think it's going to be a Thursday and Friday training. Again, it's like $60 instead of $450. I mean, I don't know. It's crazy, the discount that you get if you're a VAP member on that.
Wow.
So so that's great. For me, me meeting the work at Recovery Consulting, all of the things that I'm looking at for training work are in person as well. So like the women's seminar in February is looking to be in the Outer Banks, and a small group of women working towards, wellness and family recovery life. And that's what that's going to be about. There's an in-person training in Virginia Beach in April, the clinical conference here in Virginia. I'm going to go be training at that. Yeah.
Do you have any spare time?
Not enough, that's for sure. I'm in my own therapy, a good therapist has a therapist. And I just met with her yesterday, and that's what we talked about was like, how do you know what's the warning signs for you in life? How do you know if you're going too far? And that's one of the things I talked about was like having to recognize the limits of work, right? Like where you have to say no versus, what you can actually handle versus what you wish you could handle, and not driving myself into the ground, which is really important, is an important part of life. So it's not, I don't have a perfect science on this, but this is a big part of good mental health, right? Is making sure that I don't take on too much.
Yeah, self-care is such an important component in this work. And what you've just said there, and this is a very important message for anyone in this work, is look after yourself and make sure that you're safe as well. So no, thank you for that. Last year, you spoke at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and the session delved into the topic of addiction science and how to reduce medication-assisted treatment stigma in correctional settings, which to me was fascinating. So can you tell us about the experience and how well it was received, please, Jessica?
Oh, yeah, that was awesome. It was a great opportunity. So I have a history of doing some research work through the state opioid response grants. So the federal government has provided over the last several years through SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. That's our big federal grant funding, offices. So they provide grants to the states, and the states got these what are called SOR grants, SOR, State Opioid Response Grants. And I had the opportunity to work on the implementation of the SOR grant work in Virginia, and the Department of Corrections adding that to their services. And then, of course, COVID hit right during that time. So it was a real nightmare. And if you know anything about prisons and jails during the COVID time, everything had to, if you get an outbreak in a jail or prison, you're in real trouble, right? Because people can't go anywhere. So they did significant measures to lock down and facilities and prevent COVID from coming through facilities, which meant tabling implementation of MAT services. Anyway, so that wound up being a real hurdle and a very big, heavy lift to try to get that going. through that process, I got introduced to many people. And the research lead on that project was someone named Megan Davidson. She reached out to me to do this teaching because I sort of have an expertise in teaching on neuroscience and addiction. And because I had this intersection with that, as well as this work on working within the justice system and trying to do some implementation work and trying to reduce stigma with sheriffs and leaders within the corrections facilities was a big part of the preemptive work I was doing. It turns out that historically, a lot of people did not want MAT services in their jails and prisons, the leaders, the administrators, the sheriffs, people like that, prison wardens. They were worried about diversion of drugs. They were worried about, let's say methadone coming in, or even Suboxone coming in, and then people taking it and hiding it and then selling it and creating a black market and stuff like that. So working on measures to try to reduce that process, reduce that likelihood of that. And the main one to prevent that from happening is to offer it to everybody. Right. It's very simple, is that you offer this to everyone as a part of their treatment, and then there's no market for it being anything other than you get it. So you don't need to hide it and sell it. So, yeah, so that was a big part of this. But yeah, so the work I actually did at the Department of Justice was to teach all of the grant folks from a different grant, the directors from around the United States on the neuroscience of addiction and what MAT is, what medication-assisted treatment is, and the different tiers and types of medications, as well as the treatments that go along with it, right? So frequently when we talk about medication-assisted treatment, we talk about medication, but we forget the assisted treatment part, right? And so that it's actually a combination of things that provide the most success for people. It's not just doling out meds, right? Which people have a mental kind of hurdle to get over about that. So that was my job there, was to help everybody from around the United States that are leading these programs to understand, like, the more knowledge that's out there, the less stigma there is. And that is really a charge of all of the leadership around medication-assisted treatment, around opioid response work, around addiction generally, is trying to get the proper education to all the people. And then if the leaders have that proper education, they can then provide that to everybody else.
Did you find when you were talking to leaders and sheriffs that they had their feet dug into the ground somewhat initially when you approached them about this? Because it's quite a new approach to explain to some people. And did you find that they changed their minds quite quickly once you explained it to them fully? It's a tough
Great
one,
question, right? Because it's so dependent on well, it's dependent on a lot of things. But yes, I'm going to say this in a nice way, right? Like, a lot of law enforcement folks have a certain type of perspective because they're dealing with the problem, like the problematic behavior, the legal law-breaking behavior that many people with addiction find themselves in. And so police officers and frontline workers in the field of law enforcement are dealing with really difficult stuff day in and day out. And they are going to be more likely to have a perspective of, let's get you into the jail and then you serve your time. That's sort of their perspective, right? Like, that's a safety issue, not a treatment issue. That's really starting to change. I mean, that's really starting to change now. That was very much how it used to be. But there's a lot of leaders, sheriffs, and beat cops, right? That really are community policing based and believe in, having ride along services with them, with, behavioral health workers along with them to help deter all of this, right? So really one of the things that we can do off the bat is help people from the get-go through getting them treatment services instead of putting them directly into jail. And so there's some really great deterrence programs and diversion programs rather than, going into the jail and having to do it opposite, right? Now you're in jail and now we're having to provide you treatment in there, which is also really important. But yeah, anyway, so So the answer, the long answer is yes, a lot of people were dug in the beginning of this process. I would say 5 and 10 years ago, in particular, 10 years ago, really, really hard to get people to change their minds and get switched over. Um, Even in the problem solving courts where I was working, it was hard to get people to say, yes, we can have medication and that's a part of this process. And what we're seeing now after 10 years of that is that more and more people are saying it isn't an either or, it can be a both and process. Like some people go to like full abstinence and medication on top of that. Some people don't need medication. Some people, there's a wide continuum of types of people with a wide variety of needs, and we need to be more adept at providing those services to people. One other thing I want to say about all of this is that there is a viewpoint that it's cruel and unusual punishment to force somebody into a jail or prison without providing them the right care for detoxing off of opioids or any other type of detox. And in fact, it can cause death for some people. Benzodiazepine and alcohol detox can kill people. And so, it is the responsibility. I mean, that's a constitutional right that every human has, is to not experience cruel and unusual punishment. And so I think that combined with using the American Disabilities Act, both of those things legal arguments for the support of providing addiction services to those who are in trouble with the law, is a part of the support services that they are required to provide now. And so that the legal side of this, the legal pressure that was put on the Department of Corrections and, state and county sheriff's offices, those are the things that really have changed the viewpoint.
It's so good to hear that, over here that, that professionals like yourself are addressing this, and they're helping change people's minds around addiction, because it shouldn't be treated, my own personal view, it shouldn't be treated as a criminal justice thing. It's a health need. It really is. And it's wonderful to hear that. I used to do this a lot in the UK with police officers, and it was lovely to always see that when they realized that, treatment saves the community, if you know what I mean. So it's wonderful. So a word that you mentioned was stigma, and this comes up every one of my podcasts, Jessica. So how do you think this word alone can affect people wanting to address their addiction? And why do you think this is still such a barrier in this day and age? It just seems absurd.
It does seem absurd. Why is this a barrier? Well, there's my mind kind of went quickly because there is a whole research area on cognitive problems that humans have, right? And this is one of them, is that we get dug in on an idea and have a hard time getting new information in that counters the belief that we might have. So that's part of it, is that there's strong, long-held beliefs around the free will of the individual that's taking in a substance and then behaving badly, right? That's sort of what you see from the outside. Is if you knew nothing about anything about addiction or the behaviors around it, you would say, oh, why is that person taking in that substance and then acting out badly, right? That they clearly have a moral problem. They don't have good self-control, right? And so I think objectively, that's where the problem comes from, is just seeing that and not understanding what goes into it, right? What actually is going on behind that, what's driving that person's brain to do that. The expression of it is the use of the substance and then the behavior. But what's actually going on is a neurobiological and highly genetic problem that we now know from the Human Genome Project is extremely, genetic. So, I think the more science, the more education, and the more that we just kind of are open about things, the less stigma there is. I mean, when you think about other things that have stigma has changed around, it has been around education and being open about what's happening. And so there's like movements like Recovery Out Loud or like the Anonymous people or things like that, where it's like, let's get our voices out there and let people see us, as people in recovery. I am candidly also in recovery, long-term recovery from drugs and alcohol. And if we're talking about that, and it's not a big deal, like, look, like I mean, it's a big deal that we're able to do it and change our lives, but um, the perception is from all the way back to the early 1900s, like that you're like destitute and on the street. And those are the people that are like so horrible and they're crime causing, dirty people. And those are the people with alcoholism and addiction problems, right? And the truth is, it's everybody. It's your mom, it's your sister, it's your nephew or niece, you know? And I think the more that we talk about that, the more we see that every human is related to someone who has a problem with substance use disorder.
Yeah, the statistics around that is quite phenomenal in this country. I think they said one in three people have a family member that's going through this. And that,
yeah, and that's probably higher than that.
It probably is. That's something I read the other day, and I was like, "Oh, blimey, that sounds like a lot." Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Jessica. I read on your LinkedIn that Richmond, Virginia, is the first designated recovery city in the United States. Can you explain this to our audience and how Richmond was given this amazing sounding title?
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. You know, I wasn't directly involved in this, but I got so excited when I learned about it. So really, this is a big piece of work by the mayor of Richmond, LeVar Stoney, and along with a bunch of other agencies in the Commonwealth. So there's the Office of Recovery Services here in Virginia, which is a very cool thing that they created during the SOAR grant funding process. Through DDHDS, which is the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. It's basically like HHS, but it's the Virginia version of that. So they formed an office specific for recovery services, and I think they partnered up with the Virginia Department of Health. They got the National Alliance of Recovery Residences and the Virginia affiliate of that involved, and announced it at the national conference, the NAR conference, just a few weeks ago. So really exciting project that there's places around the world. I guess there's like 30 other locations around the world that are designated this way. But the concept is that we reduce stigma by ensuring that resources are available to anyone who needs those services within that city. And so that's what Richmond has been committed to, is how can we make sure that we have the resources available to anyone who might need them, and make sure that people know what recovery services are out there and that they're able to access and use those services wisely and help them to recover. So that's the concept, and that is why Richmond was designated in this way, is because the mayor is committed to that. I think to having that be a legacy of his. And I think there's a bunch of agencies in the state that are willing to really help support that and put that information out there and provide those resources.
Wow, a big shout out to your mayor on that one. That's an incredible achievement. So one of 30 locations around the world?
Yeah, exactly. And the first in the US.
Goodness me. Well, that's just incredible. And I wanted to obviously ask that because when I read that, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just incredible stuff. So big congratulations to you there. I'd just like to say one statistic I read was that the latest data from the State Department of Health finds that nearly 2,500 Virginians have overdosed and died in 2022. So how is Virginia currently coping with the opioid crisis, and what harm reduction services are available for people who are using opioids or other substances in your state?
Yeah. So, you know, those numbers are high, right? And it's I don't know what 2023 looks like. I do know that there's starting to be a decline in this problem, probably due to the availability of naloxone. And so in Virginia, we have something called the Revive program, REVIVE, Revive, and you can access free naloxone kits. You can get trained on it. You can provide that to training to other people. You know, if you have a program, you can get free naloxone and give it out. I mean, it's really quite good. So that's one of the great things that is provided here. There's mobile outreach programs. So I always think, well, Virginia's unique, but then it's actually not. Much of the United States, the states have, these urban pockets with lots of rural areas. And that is Virginia. Virginia has a mountainous area that's quite rural. We have a rural Southwest Virginia. And then like on the coast, there's a few big cities plus Richmond. So it's a, unique kind of, in that it's a big, big state, lots of rural spaces. But then, like I said, I think that, and then I think, well, so many states are like this. There's lots of rural, and then these pockets of urban. Needless to say, that requires some outreach when you're outside of the urban area, in order to try to provide services to people that otherwise wouldn't have access. And so they've created here some mobile outreach programs, trucks that come through town and are providing medications and services and trainings and opportunities to get some resources. There's, I think there's something called a comprehensive harm reduction process. So it's CHR, comprehensive harm reduction. And in Virginia, the Virginia Department of Health has been committed to doing a full comprehensive harm reduction process. So it's a whole set of public services, not just one thing. So we frequently think of, when we think of harm reduction, people think of like needle exchange programs, right? Where people can use clean needles to keep using or something. And that can be really highly controversial to, I think, some of the public, right? But really what we're talking about is providing a set of services. That's one thing that some people might need. If those people aren't going to stop using, it would be really helpful if they stop spreading disease, right? So that's the idea behind that, is like, okay, so that's one level or one type of harm reduction, right? Naloxone is another type where it would be really helpful if people weren't dying from overdosing, right? So providing that. But then there's a whole other set of things like providing peer support for people, providing education to people, providing actual referrals for treatment. These are harm reduction components of a comprehensive harm reduction model. Providing testing for HIV, hepatitis, sexually transmitted diseases, and other types of linkages for like medical and support services, particularly mental health, but also regular like physical health services, getting comprehensive checkup. These are all types of harm reduction that need to be provided, and that the Virginia Department of Health is doing. So that's kind of amazing.
It really does. You've actually just answered my next question, because I was going to ask you about harm reduction, but I think you've answered that incredibly thoroughly. So thank you for that. It sounds like Virginia is doing some amazing work. It's, I've been doing these podcasts for a little while now, and it's lovely to hear a state is addressing this head on and not running away from it or just trying to ignore it. So it's just wonderful to hear. Last couple of questions, Jessica. Do you have a message for anyone listening to this podcast who's going through an addiction?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the concept of putting a semicolon in instead of a period in your life, right? There's a whole movement a few years ago about this, of like, it's a suicide prevention movement of, let's put a semicolon there in your life rather than a period and ending it. And that is how I view it. The process of recovery from addiction is you can recover, treatment works, and you don't have to give up. And so giving up means putting that period in and saying, I'm done. I don't deserve to move forward with my life. I want you to think about putting a semicolon there and say, I feel that way right now, and there is hope for a better day tomorrow, and I might just need some help to get there. So reaching out for help is the number one thing that we need to be able to do. That is so hard for us to do, is to say, I need help. Can you please help me? I don't know what to do. It's okay to say that.
Wow. Well, thank you very much indeed, Jessica. Last question. Can you tell our listeners how to best to contact you and find your service online, please?
Totally. So my website is recoveryconsulting.org. And that's probably the easiest way to find me. I do have an email, which is jswan@recoveryconsulting.org. That's jswan@recoveryconsulting.org. If you want to reach out, connect, if you have questions, or need any support, reach out to me directly through my email, and we can connect and figure out a way to help you.
Well, Jessica, it's been a real honor and a privilege, and to hearing about the amazing work that you're doing for the community and for the country. It really was. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.